Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be building a workbench. Now the workbench I've got in the garage right here is actually the same design as my dad's workbench, which was the same design as his dad's workbench, which was actually the same design as his dad's workbench. So this is kind of a legacy workbench in that it's the same kind of design as my great grandpa's workbench, which is tried and true, over 100-year-old design, and this thing's built like a tank. Now today we're doing something a little bit different. Let me show you over here. We're building a workbench to go inside that shed, and that's because I'm building an outdoor extra workshop to do woodwork and whatnot, so I can blow the dust around and not get it all over the motorcycles and the cars and all the stuff that I have in the garage. So I got a kit, and we're going to build this thing out of a kit. Now, I saw a meme the other day that said if you have to, or if you can't build a workbench, you probably don't need a workbench, and this is kind of halfway in between. It's a kit, it comes with some parts, but you're also building it out of 2x4s and plywood, so it should make the job a little bit easier. Let me show you what we got. Let's build it, put it up out there, and if you want more info on that little project we're doing, I'm gonna have a video all about how we built like kind of miniature outdoor workshop out of a shed. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button if you wanna check out that video. It'll be coming up soon. Let's get to work. So this is the kit we're using from 2x4 Basics. It comes with these. These are the vertical legs and the braces up here. And this is kind of what's going to help you build the workbench. So these are the vertical legs. You're going to use standard 2x4s you pick up from your store. And then it's got these little things if you want to build shelves above it. Comes with hardware as well. So that's the kit. In addition to that, you are going to get some 2x4s and a sheet of plywood. Now you're going to need to get all this stuff in accordance with size workbench you need. I have enough 2x4s for this, but if you're going to go full width 2x4s on your workbench, you're going to have to get a few more than what I got. Mine's going to be a little bit smaller. So let's get into putting this thing together. Now here's my first tip for when you're building one of these at home, and that is cut your plywood first. And the reason you should cut your plywood first is because you're going to use the 2x4s to cut your plywood. I'm going to show you how. The first thing you do is you're going to put those two pieces of wood down on your driveway or ground, whatever you're cutting on, and that's going to give you something to stand the plywood up on. That gives the saw a place to pass underneath. Then you're going to take your next piece, and you can see what I'm doing here. I'm measuring where that piece should go. And now take into account how much standoff you have on your saw. Most saws are going to be 1/2 to a 1-inch standoff, so you're going to have to calculate that into your cut. You're now going to clamp the 2x4 along the line that you just marked, and this 2x4 is going to be your saw guide. So you can take your saw and run it right along that 2x4 and get it cut perfectly straight every time. Now, if you don't have this kind of a saw, or you don't want to have to do this, when you buy your plywood, if you take it to the saw at your local hardware store, many of them have saws that can make these cuts for you very precise. All you have to do is show up with your dimensions. So that's another good option for you. Now, after you're done cutting the top, you're going to want to cut another piece the exact same size as that first one, because this workbench has a top and it also has a shelf at the bottom. So you're going to want these exactly the same size. And don't forget to say hi to the neighbor. Hey, hey! And next up, we're going to start cutting up our 2x4s. Now, I'm using my shop vac with a dust collection system on it and a chop saw. You don't need something this fancy. You can do it with a regular handsaw if you want. If you want to see a video about that cool dust collection system I'm running, it's going to be in the workshop shed, and I'm going to have a video on that as well. And the next thing you do is realize that you didn't buy enough 2x4s on your first trip to the hardware store, and you drive back to the hardware store to pick up 2 more. Now you notice here I'm loading 3 because, knowing me, I will make a cut incorrectly and need an extra one, and if I happen to have an extra one at the end, you can never have too many 2x4s laying around. Now, putting this whole thing together took me about an hour start to finish. It's not a really hard project to do, and I was actually really pleasantly surprised with how easy this thing went together, and also how good the instructions were. It took me about an hour, like I said, and that was with having to move the camera around and deal with all that. So it's a pretty quick project to get done. Now, you start by taking 2 of the legs, as you can see here, and putting the 2x4s. Now, these are the ones that are going to be on the long edge of the workbench. You're going to put the top one on first, and then the bottom one. With those 2 pieces in place, the next step is to secure the other 2x4s, and this makes the depth of the workbench. So you can see here kind of it's starting to take shape. You can see how wide it's going to be and how deep the workbench is going to be. Now, all of these are held in with screws. The screws come with it, and this is another one of those things. You could do this all by hand with a screwdriver and a drill, but having an impact driver or a drill driver is going to make this job a lot easier and a lot quicker. And those 2x4s are now followed up by getting the bottom shelf into place. If you did everything right, it should be a real nice and snug fit, and you can kind of tap it in there. I just used my feet to tap it in there. And from this point on, I put it in the shed so I could kind of build it in the shed and start on the other side. So I'm just doing the exact same process I did before with the other 2 sets of legs. This is now going to be the front of the workbench. And now with both sides of the workbench completed, we can put the 2 sides together, and everything kind of just sleeves together at this point. If you have all your measurements right, it should just all kind of pop in place. And now we're going to put those top 2x4s in place. Now, something to notice here, when I'm going at this with the screw gun, everything goes in at an angle, and all the holes in the workbench are at the correct angle, so they kind of miter their way in, if that's the way to put it, but they all have the correct angle, and you just kind of put the screws in there and let them run in. And they're in there at an angle to torque everything down and pull it together. So it really does snug itself up as you're tightening in these screws. Now I've got most of the frame here assembled. A couple things I just want to point out here. The way these things come in, you notice the way this 2x4 runs inside of these 2. So when you're calculating your cuts, if you're doing like a 24-inch piece of plywood up here, a 2-foot piece of plywood, you're going to subtract 3 inches off of these. So this is not going to be 24 inches. You're going to cut this one 21 inches to make up for the distance in these 2. Now the other thing is, I've actually been really pleasantly surprised. I was a little skeptical about buying plastic parts. These are more like a fiber reinforced plastic, so a little bit better than what I had thought. And then the way the screws go in, they go in at an angle, so it pulls everything tight as you tighten it down. And so far, this thing is rock solid. It's really stout. Kind of better than what I was expecting. I was expecting it to put some bracing in here, but I don't think I'm gonna have to. So let's finish this sucker up, put the top on it, get this bottom secured, and get our workbench done. So now we're coming into kind of the final assembly portion of this thing, and we're going to screw the board down to the 2x4s. Now the instructions on this thing don't actually really show you doing this to the bottom one, at least not that I could notice the instructions I had, but I would still do it. Attaching that piece of plywood to the 2x4s is going to give you an extra level of rigidity and help hold everything together and make it sturdy. And after completing the bottom, we did the exact same thing to the top, using a bunch of screws to securely fasten that thing to the 2x4s to make this workbench real sturdy. Now this is just my opinion, but I don't think any workbench is really complete without a vise, so I did put a vise on it. This isn't a big one, but it's enough to do the job. Now, one thing I would like to point out here is the hardware you can see me using here is the hardware that the vise came with, and it was just self-tapping screws. And they're okay. They were actually not the worst screws in the world, but they really didn't instill a lot of confidence in me, so I did wind up taking those out and replacing those with regular bolts in the back with washers on the back side, and on the front I used much longer wood screws going down into that 2x4 to make it a little bit more rigid. So there it is, our workbench is set up. I'm actually really impressed, more than I thought I was going to be. I thought I was going to do some bracing in there to keep this thing stable, but it is pretty rock solid. Now, you did see me just a second ago put the clamp on there, and I would recommend, if you're getting a workbench, get a clamp. When I ordered the kit here, you could order it with a clamp. It saves you a few bucks. So that's what I did. I got a link for that and all this stuff down below. Now, what I didn't do, I didn't wind up using these. What these are for is you can screw them down to your bench like there and there. They have these slots for 2x4s, and you can build a shelf. And if you're doing that with like a big 4x8 size workbench, go for it. With this one, it's going to be smaller. It would eat up too much table space, so we're not doing that. The other thing I added was this extra piece of wood. I screwed it to the back, and I'm doing that for two things. One, I'm going to be mounting a power strip to it, and the other is I always lose stuff off the back of my workbench, so that'll prevent that from happening. I would definitely do that, or at least screw a little piece of wood along the back so you don't lose screws off the back of the workbench. Yeah, but like I said, I'm impressed. It's a pretty good, solid system if you're working on, you know, building yourself a workbench or setting up your garage or doing an extra workspace like I am here. Now, if you want to see how I'm building this entire outdoor wood shop, I'm going to have a dust collection system, lighting in it, and a bunch of other little gizmos to make this thing work a little bit better. I'm going to have a link for that video down in the description below as soon as that one is out. But if you want to see more stuff like this, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and leave me comments. Let me know what kind of workbench you're building or what kind of projects you'd like to see on the channel. Thanks for watching.